Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much again for tuning in to another edition of Dirty Leather on Stadium Rant. My name is Jesse, alongside my co-hosts Chris and Doug. We're going to bring you a lot of baseball news that's happened over the last week. Uh, as you know, spring training, we finally hit the first couple of games, the first couple of days of spring training with finally some baseball action, a lot of action that's gone around. And also, we're going to cover some of the teams that are staring down a pretty nasty situation uh, going forward with their rosters, their bullpens, their rotations, so on and so forth. We have a lot to cover because, again, this has been a very hectic week, and of course, we'll be covering the Tony Clark resignation shortly in the broadcast. But we are going to start with our weekly rants. So, for those that are not familiar with weekly rants, this is the part of the broadcast where we basically just talk about whatever it is that's on our mind, whether it be a team or the sport in general, everything that just we think that needs to be discussed and should have its own little segment. So I'm going to start off with our weekly rants for this week, and that is going to be about Spencer Jones for the New York Yankees. Now, if you're not familiar with Spencer Jones, he is the number four a ranked prospect for the New York Yankees farm system. He just dropped out of the top 100 prospect list this season. I believe he was selected in the first round of the 2022 or 2023 MLB draft. Had a really good season last year, had about 35 home runs, but he has struggled with strikeouts immensely. So he has been looking to try to rectify that in any way that he can. And one of the things that he's doing this year is I actually read an article this afternoon about his batting stance because he's actually made a change to his batting stance. And what is that change? Well, he is trying to model his swinging or his batting stance and his swing after Shohei Ohtani, who is arguably the best player in baseball, depending on what you believe or what your stance is with the Dodgers and the Yankees. But besides the point, so it came out this yesterday that Spencer Jones spoke with Brian Hoke of MLB.com, who's the Yankees beat reporter, talking about how he adapted Otani's swing into his game. And he said he is a great reference of a really good mover with a great swing. And he's one of those guys I can look at with some of the stuff he does, and I try to apply it in whichever way I can. I don't think that's a very good idea to model your swing after Shohei Ohtani. And here's why. There's a couple of problems with that. Number one, there's a height and weight difference. Spencer Jones is 3 inches larger and is a couple pounds heavier, I believe, in terms of muscle mass than Shohei Ohtani. Uh, Ohtani is 6'4", and Spencer Jones is 6'7". He is basically a second Aaron Judge, depending on whether he booms or busts in the league. But still, he is a very large guy, and 3 inches can definitely change the mechanics of somebody's swing. You think that 3 inches is not that large of a difference. It is. It definitely is. That goes for pitchers as well. If you have a 6'4" frame or a 6'7" frame, that can make all the difference in your delivery, your approach, your grip, so on and so forth, your arm angle too. That's very interesting to see how that would happen. Because the other thing, and it's the other thing that should be mentioned, is that it's very hard to adapt to a new stance after hitting your natural stance for so long. This change only came about this offseason. This is not a gradual change. This is not something that's happened over time. This is something that has seemingly happened over the course of the offseason. And of course, the other thing that you have to mention is that Jones still has a very high strikeout rate. It's around 30%, maybe even higher than that. He can't hit 35% on his worst games or in his worst stretches of baseball. Well, Ohtani is about 25%. We have not seen that stance tried on a 6'7" man with a strike zone like that and a swinging approach like that. Now, we don't have the specifics with regards to Spencer Jones' actual swings and sabermetrics because he hasn't played in the major league game yet. But he does have a little bit of a hole in his swing, especially when it comes to down in the zone, having issues laying off the pitches. That's something you have to consider. I don't think it's a very good idea to directly copy or take inspiration from Shohei Ohtani when you haven't even played in the big leagues yet. Get comfortable in your natural position and then experiment as you go along. So if you're in crunch time of the season, or if you are playing a couple of throwaway games in the later part of the season, yeah, you can experiment with it. But if you're in spring training and you still haven't proven yourself yet at the major league level, that's a little it's a little bit of a reach. Yeah, spring training is all about experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But I'd be really careful to uh, see what he does, and really careful to really go head first into it. Now, of course, it worked well yesterday because he hit a mammoth home run against the Detroit Tigers. So you could say, oh, yeah, it works. Still one at bat, give it some time. Let's see what happens. Personally, I don't think it's a good idea to go head first and jump right into it, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll see what happens. So that's my rant for the day. Spencer Jones, I think, is a very good prospect, but we have to see what happens with his batting stance, especially with spring training going along. All right, Doug, what do you got in your mind this Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, well, just as a quick follow up to that, I saw Spencer Jones play in Buffalo last summer, and I was quite impressed actually with his swing. And I think if he were going to adapt his swing, now he's not going to adapt his swing so that he's going to adopt the fundamentals of a typical Japanese hitter. Now, most Japanese hitters have a common swing path, or at least fundamentally, they're a little bit similar, right? Otani, I would say, is somewhat of an anomaly from that, but he still has a swing that is similar to what you would expect from a Japanese hitter. So when Jones says that he's going to change his swing, I'm just kind of curious fundamentally what that would look like. Does he want to change like the trajectory of his swing path? Does he want to is it with his setup? He wants to, maybe extend his arms out a little bit further like Otani does. So I'd be interested to see how that plays out. I haven't seen Jones swing since he's adopted, or applied any new strategies, but that would be interesting to see. So I'll have to tune into a Yankees game this spring and see what's going on with that. Because even his game, if he wanted to be like a gap type hitter and hit for average, I think he could do that. Like he doesn't necessarily have to be a 30, 40 home run guy in MLB when he gets called up. I think he could still be highly productive and be a 20 home run guy and hit, 30, 40 doubles. That would be helpful for the Yankees. They don't need that huge power guy because they already have that, right? So if he can be productive by hitting, an OPS around 800, 20 home runs and hit, 280, close to 300, that will play really well for the Yankees if he gets there. But anyway, my rant is something different from that and kind of offers a segue into what we're going to talk about with Tony Clark leaving the MLBPA. I didn't know this, but there is only apparently one MLB player rep who is Latin American in all of MLB, and that's Francisco Lindor of the Mets. And he's from Puerto Rico, right? Now, Latin American players make up a third of all of MLB players, currently rostered MLB players. So it's interesting with Clark coming out and a lawyer, so to speak, coming in. He is a lawyer coming in with very little playing experience. I wonder how much of a lens he'll have for the Latin American players, because already they're really being a little bit exploited, right? Latin American players are kind of exempt from the MLB draft. They're not part of the draft. There's no international draft. And that topic is going to be addressed. I thought it was going to be addressed with this next round of negotiations. But given that there aren't any Latin American player reps, I just think that the topics that really need to be addressed, like the international draft, like Latin American players being exploited, they can be signed as 16-year-olds, and then often they get lost in the system of these teams. That needs to be addressed. Maybe there needs to be an international pool where all players are considered for MLB draft. I think these topics are really important. And when you bring in a new MLB president who doesn't really have the pulse of the players, especially the Latin American players, I wonder if their needs, and that they have a lot of needs that need to be addressed, I wonder if those needs are going to be addressed. I don't think that they will be. And I think that some serious issues like the international player pool, like the possibility of an international draft, And like this problem of Latin American players being lost in the system from the age of 16, and if they don't make it, who knows what happens to them, right? I see that as being a big problem. And given the fact that 30% of the players in MLB are Latin American, they have to have a voice. They need to have that voice in negotiations. I think Tony Clark was mindful of that. And with the new regime moving in, I just don't think they have a pulse on what's happening with the Latin American representation, because there really isn't any
Right.
representation. So that I see that as being a problem that's not going to go away, and it needs to be addressed. So that's my rant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Latin America, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, all big, booming areas in the world where the game is respected and a lot of international players come from. So we'll have to see how that factors in,
Well,
especially with the upcoming season.
Puerto
Yeah.
Rico is part of the draft. Puerto Rico is included in the
Okay.
MLB draft, but we're talking about Venezuela, the Dominican Republic,
Yes.
Curacao, Panama, all these countries with, you know, lots and lots of players in MLB systems in the minor leagues for years, right? And they don't
Yeah.
really have their rights advocated for. Puerto Rico would be the exception, but the other countries with a lot of representation in MLB are just not represented at all.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's going to be very interesting going forward to how that plays into basically everything. Like I said, CBA, the future of the game, growth, so on and so forth. We'll see what happens. Okay, Khris, what do you have that's on your mind this Sunday evening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's the time of the year now, as spring training start, where we hear, all about, all players are in the best shape of their life, or and they're doing like body watches and things like that. And I've always found that kind of ridiculous, quite frankly. Anyways, but it was brought to my mind with a specific Red Sox prospect who just came in to camp, and I will say this is one that is very different than just like best shape of your life. So Justin Gonzalez, who's 19 years old for the Red Sox, last season I believe he came in at 6'4", 210. I believe were his measurements. He's coming in this year, and great, he's still growing because he's 19, so he's 6'6" now, but he's coming in at 270. So over the
Wow.
span of a year, he's gained 60 something pounds. And he actually came out and did an interview. He compared himself to Aaron Judge. He says he wants to be Aaron Judge. And so he's trying to build himself like Aaron Judge and get that sort of like incredibly imposing presence. And Justin Gonzalez has been on the radar a little bit last year too. He's obviously very young, but for his power, that is what the Red Sox sort of have him pegged as. But I worry for a couple of reasons. A 19-year-old gaining 60 pounds in a year. I mean, I understand that you expect a lot of these players, especially as we were just talking about Latin American players who are getting, signed at 16 years old. They're being signed with, in part, the idea of projection, right? And they're projecting out that these bodies are going to change and they are going to bulk up and they are going to get bigger, But when I saw those numbers for a kid of his age, it was just incredibly jarring to me. And I don't know if it's healthy either. You know what I mean? Like I have some worries about the pressure he's put on himself, even to jump that fast, let alone whatever, the Red Sox pressure may have been putting on him. I'm not sure, or that they mandated it, or this is just him doing it on his own, or off season or workouts. And I mean, I don't want to mention it at all, but we are living in an era of the steroids era. And I wonder, it begs the question, when people grow that fast, bulk up that quickly, a lot of times that is mentioned. And even if it's not true with him, which I'm certainly hoping it's not, it certainly is going to bring up questions, I think, and unnecessary, questions for him, moving through the system. If he does explode this year, and suddenly hit, an insane amount of home runs in the minor leagues, it's inviting negative potential attention to him as a 19-year-old kid. That's really not fair to him, and I personally, I don't think he is doing steroids. I just think that it's going to bring up the question, you know what I mean? Just when you see somebody blow up that much, 10, 20, even 30 pounds, makes sense, but 67 pounds is just it's pretty remarkably dramatic of a difference, you know.
Yeah.
And so that concerns me. So I guess that's my rant. Is I wonder how much, you know, pressure we put on some of these kids to have to want, you know, like the fact that he's trying to compare himself to literally arguably the best player in the American League right now and saying he has to be that. You know what I mean? You know, I worry that it creates an unhealthy environment for some of
Yeah.
these kids. So
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
I mean, number one, there's a pressure aspect because you've basically just put yourself into a headspace where you have to constantly improve. And again, a 60-pound jump, that's not something to sneeze at. That is something that should absolutely be looked at, whether it be steroids or whether it be just pure bulking up over the off season. And again, the other thing that you have to take into consideration outside of the steroid aspect is how do his mechanics change? How does he perform? What happens to all of his, what happens to his skill set? Does it change? Does he lose points? Does he gain points? We'll have to see how that happens. We'll have to see, how that 60-pound weight gain and those couple of new inches on his height factor into his performance. So that's something we have to definitely look into, especially for the Red Sox, if they're looking so highly on this prospect. So, with that being said, we are going to move to our next subject, and this is something that happened in the baseball world last week, and it shocked everybody. So, as everybody might know, or you may not have heard, Tony Clark is out as the Major League Baseball Players Association head, and Bruce Meyer is now stepping into that role. That comes after Clark resigned earlier this week after a revelation of an inappropriate relationship with his sister-in-law back in, I believe, 2023 or 2024, when she was working for the union. So that came as a shock, basically, to everybody, because at the same time he was undergoing, or the MLBPA was undergoing an investigation from the federal government with regards to a for-profit venture called Players Way, which basically aims to help underprivileged kids in baseball and so on and so forth. There's been concerns about meddling. There's been concerns about improper handling of funds. So when he stepped down, we thought that maybe something did happen with that um, with that foundation or with that for-profit venture. We were not expecting what actually transpired to happen. That took us all off guard. And the other thing that you have to take in consideration after the fallout of the initial news is now that Bruce Meyer is stepping in. And don't forget that Bruce Meyer was the head negotiator last time the CBA talks were ongoing back in 2021. And that led to a 99-day lockout. He was very, very staunch on a lot of positions. And again, the salary cap wasn't one of them, or was briefly mentioned, because there were a whole bunch of other issues. Now you have the salary cap forefront, and he has been a staunch opponent of that. And now he's the head honcho. So essentially, it does complicate some of the lockout business, because now you've got a far more hard-headed, not willing to negotiate on that particular front figure, for lack of better terms, leading the lockout talks on the MLBPA side. Some people do think it simplifies it, because maybe there might be uh, maybe there's not really a lot of harmony, for lack of better terms, with the Players Association. Maybe there's a bit of debris going around. Maybe there's a bit of discombobulation and confusion going around in the wake of it. And of course, there'd be some confusion after the fact, but in all honesty, I don't think this really changes anything with the lockout talks, because Bruce Meyer was going to be leading negotiations no matter what. And he has already been staunch headed. He's a sports lawyer. He's done this before. He has 20 plus years of experience with this. So it really doesn't change anything. And the other thing is that with the lockout business as well, and the other aspect that's happened is that there's about a $2 billion war chest for Major League Baseball to pay out owners in the event that games are lost. But it's not going to cancel the whole season, essentially, because you have to think about the TV deals and the revenue that come from it. And $75 million per team is not going to be anywhere close to covering that. So that's something that I wanted to get out there. But that was a shocking turn of events that happened when that came out earlier this week.
Yeah, it
Doug,
was.
yeah, Doug,
Well,
what are your thoughts on it?
I don't think the players are happy about it. either of those issues. Obviously, with the departure of Tony Clark, they're not happy about that, rightfully so. But they're definitely not happy with Bruce Myers stepping in, because, like I said, he's got his one issue that he's kind of digging his heels about. Anytime you have a labor lawyer coming in and basically taking over all negotiations, it's not a good sign, right? And you're not going to get past that one central theme, which is the salary cap, right? And not every player is against the idea of a salary cap. I think that's kind of the general misconception, right? Mm-hmm. I don't believe that every player is. I mean, some players definitely on the lower end would benefit from a salary cap.
Yeah.
At the high end, maybe they're opposed to it. It'd be interesting to see, really, if they were to poll all players, what the percentage would be for and what the percentage would be against, because I really have no idea. But I do know in the interviews that I've heard, actually, Eric Hosmer, I was listening to him today while I was out shoveling snow. I was listening to baseball today, and he does not seem to have a high opinion of Bruce Meyer. And he seemed to have a good read of the voice and of the pulse of the players union. Hosmer did, because he was the players rep for a couple of teams, right? And he did not seem to think that Meyer really had all players' best interest in mind.
Yeah, definitely. He was, I believe, almost unanimously or elected as the representative from the vote, from my understanding. But that's just basically a means to try to get somebody in the leadership position before these large CBA talks commence within the next month or two. Because don't forget, CBA talks don't start after the season. They are progress. They happen during the middle of the season as well. So this is a long, lengthy process for this to happen. And if the salary cap is the main issue, Bruce Meyer is basically trying to survive with the salary cap issue, essentially. But what happens when the salary cap issue is resolved? Be it a salary floor, or maybe a soft salary cap, or whether it be the no salary cap or a hard salary cap, even. So what happens after that? That's something we have to consider going forward.
The international draft is a major issue as well, right? That's not a light issue. Like, there are a lot of people advocating for that, right? Or not advocating for that, but it certainly belongs in the negotiation, I think. That topic.
Definitely. That's definitely going to be part of the negotiations for this year's, or this runaround, CBA runaround, essentially. So we'll have to see what happens. But I don't think the players really wanted Bruce Meyer, because he's more just a corporate lawyer and a sports lawyer. I don't think the players want a sports lawyer. They want somebody that represents them. And this new wave of players that are coming in, Skeens, McGonigal when he gets called up, Griffin when he gets called up. They want, Corbin Carroll, so on and so forth. The older guys are moving out, because don't forget, it was mainly Max Scherzer that was leading, the subcommittee for the players last time. He's basically on his way out. He's still talking with the Blue Jays, which we'll get into soon. But we'll see what happens with that. Chris, what are your thoughts about it, with this whole Tony Clark situation?
I mean, I already was very worried about next season of baseball, whether we were going to have one at all, or at least certainly going to have a delay again, because of the exact issues we're talking about being so contentious. We all talk about the salary cap being the big one and potentially salary floor, but Doug's right. The international draft is also a major bone of contention that I don't think gets talked about enough. And even, we saw from the last CBA, there was some stuff that we didn't even really have on our radar that was real sticking points for both sides as well. And I just, one thing, for better or worse, I mean, we've talked about Tony Clark for a long time and not always in a positive light. But for the most part, the players have viewed him fairly well as far as representing them. And, we know the players union for baseball is, the strongest of the major sports. It has been, and they've done really well at getting a lot of what they want out of most of these deals, even with delays to the season and lockouts and everything, and I just don't see this going any other way other than that we have a pretty substantial lockout. I just don't think, even forgetting his personal viewpoints and everything, and being a lot more staunch than maybe, the players might necessarily want. I just don't think he has the same pull power that Tony Clark had. I just don't see him being able to be able to sort of find that middle ground or anything in the way that Tony Clark does. I don't think he has the same respect that Tony Clark did, and I think in the long run that is going to be a major issue for him. As far as leading the players union and being able to come to something. Either I see one of two things happening. Either it leads to a potential full season lockout because he can't get stuff done, or he ends up conceding and letting out more than the players would want to in order to get a season going, in which case the players are going to be probably furious about it. So in either scenario, I don't see going well for him. So it's definitely a very concerning development, at least in my opinion, as far as for those of us who love baseball and hoping to see it in its full form next season. I have some serious. I already had reservations and doubts, and this has not helped my outlook on it.
Do you think we call it the strongest players union because it's the oldest players union, or because they've been able to go this long without a salary cap? Like, why do we refer to it as the strongest players union? Because the other
that's a good question.
Thriving. Yeah. The NFL, the players seem to be doing just fine in terms of salaries, and they've got a cap there, right? So I don't.
Yeah, the salaries in and of themselves in NFL, but none of them are guaranteed. In NBA, you could argue is in a pretty good spot, salary wise, obviously, and theirs are more guaranteed. But there's some other issues that are going on there. I think as far as pure guaranteed safety nets for players, I think the MLB is the best situation still, at least in the American market. I do think maybe in the other sports you can get us, although with Ohtani and now, a couple other players, Soto and everything else, maybe that's up for debate too, but I think in like MLB, you can get a bit higher yearly salary than you typically do in the MLB.
But MLB, in effect, Marvin Miller, he was the first advocate for the players union, but they in effect created the free agency system that we now know of, right?
Yeah.
And the other sports kind of copied that system, but then it was unsustainable and they had to restructure it. In MLB, there hasn't really been any restructuring. It's just kept going up and up and up and up. And they you're right, though. It is a really powerful union. And I just hope it's not an extended, full season lockout, because 94, I still have bad memories of that season. That was so sad back then.
Yeah.
Last year, especially for the Montreal Expos. That was their magical run that year. It should have been. And it never happened because of the lockouts.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the other thing. The two things that were brought up. Number one, does Bruce Meyer even have the pull factor to bring his entire Players Association together and rally around a specific issue? Probably not. And then the second thing is that really the players just kind of want to play baseball. That's the other thing. I mean, Skeens wants to play baseball. Connor Griffin wants to play baseball. Tariq Skubal would just like to play baseball, wherever he may end up in 2027 or 2028, depending on what happens. So that's the other thing you have to consider. So the MLBPA are not really in a very healthy spot. And that was one of the things that was being alluded to, not just on X or social media, but across a lot of baseball articles. Is the MLBPA essentially not a good spot with regards to this next upcoming lockout negotiation or these CBA negotiations? And the answer is yes, because I don't think a lot of people really respect Bruce Meyer. I don't think he's very well respected by his own clients, for quote unquote clients. He's not really respected well at all by the owners, and they're probably just going to push him right over. And like they did last time in 2021. And I don't think this is going to be any different in 2026. But we'll see what happens with the lockout length and see how long this goes and whether or not the same exact scenario happens where they start canceling games and then suddenly there's a breakthrough afterwards. So we'll see what happens. But maybe something in the ballpark like that. Maybe you'll miss a couple of games, maybe a month or two of the season. Full-fledged lockout, from my personal opinion, I still think it's unlikely, but at least a quarter of the season might go. I think at worst case, I have the season.
I
Yeah.
think there should be a fans union. I advocate for there to be a fans union.
That could be
We need our
something that
we need our rights brought to the table in these negotiations.
definitely we just want to watch baseball. That's all we want to do. We just want to watch baseball. All right, so moving on to our next subject, just to keep everything going along. So again, with spring training going along and finally kicking off, there's already some teams that are having injury trouble, and there's two that I want to bring up. That being the Atlanta Braves and the Minnesota Twins. So I talked about the Braves last week briefly with the loss of Spencer Schwellenbach from their rotation. I also did forget to mention that AJ Smith-Shawver is also not going to be pitching for a little bit because he is recovering from Tommy John surgery. So you might not see him in 2026 at all. So that's two starters that are down. And then recently, I believe earlier this week or a couple of days ago, Hurston Waldrep, who was the Braves' #2 prospect in 2024, he also had to undergo arthroscopic elbow surgery for bone spurs. And he did so, or he will be doing so tomorrow. And that recovery time might knock him out for, at the very best, the first half of the season, at the very worst, all of 26. So you are down essentially three pitchers in that Atlanta Braves rotation. I had already said last week that rotation was very thin because they have Chris Sale, they have Spencer Strider, who might be a wild card because he is making his first full season since Tommy John surgery, and we have to see how he performs back at the MLB level. And at the 3 to 5 spot, that's very questionable because you have basically three bullpen guys in Ronaldo Lopez, Grant Holmes, and Bryce Elder pitching for you in those 3 to 5 spots. And as a result, your bullpen is stretched. You still have Raisel Iglesias and you have Robert Suarez, who you signed this offseason, which helps your bullpen a little bit. And you also have Ian Hamilton, which is a nice little pickup if he does perform. But at the same time, you're running quite thin in the pitching department, not just in terms of depth on the major league level, but also in terms of the minor league level as well, because Cam Caminiti is still quite some time away, and J.R. Ritchie, that's your next best hope, essentially.
He looks good.
And he
looks
does look good. He does look good, but that's a lot of pressure to put on him, especially when your rotation is down to basically two pitchers in Sale, and he's getting up there in age. He's going to be 38 this year. And Spencer Strider, who we don't know how he's going to perform after Tommy John surgery with his first full season back in the majors. So that's the other thing you have to consider. And there are other pitching prospects. Grace McKenzie, he's still quite far away. Didier Fuentes, who might actually be maybe a diamond in the rough if he pitches well, but last year he was not very good. He had a 232 average with a 114 whip, which is nice, but he had issues with leaving guys on base and having them score. So when you have a 4.5 ERA, that's not really going to go down well with a lot of coaches, unfortunately. So Drew Hackenberg might be the next man up, and he performed awful last year. He saw major regression in basically every single aspect of the game. Less strikeouts, more walks, high average at 280, and a whip of 1.82. So you're running really thin in that department. So you might have to turn to the free agency market, and there's still maybe one or two pitchers. And Lucas Giolito, he's still up there, and Zach Littell, who's still up there. One of those two is going to go to Atlanta, like I said last week. And that's only cemented by the fact that Hurston Waldrep's going to be out for probably a good portion, if not the entire 2026 season. At the same time, in Minnesota, the Twins just lost Pablo Lopez to Tommy John as well, and they almost lost Joe Ryan. Now, thankfully, if you're not familiar, he was scratched yesterday with back tightness, I believe. He came back today, and he's perfectly fine, thankfully. So that's a major bullet dodge, but still, it's a very, very same. It's quite the same situation as the Atlanta Braves, where you basically are stretched to one or two different pitchers in the lineup or in the rotation, excuse me, because now all the pressure is going to fall on Joe Ryan at this point, and Bailey Ober as well. And Bailey Ober was not really good last year. He struggled immensely. And you also have Simeon Woods Richardson, who is returning from injury. You did pick up Taj Bradley last year, who might help you a little bit. But at the same time, you're just looking at this rotation, and you're looking at your bullpen, and you're just kind of thinking, and you're just looking and saying, where are we going to get these extra guys from? You still have Mick Abel. You still have Kendry Rojas, who are two really decent prospects who can absolutely perform for you if they get it going, obviously. And then with the bullpen, you're running quite thin in that bullpen, unfortunately. You still have Taylor Rogers. You have Justin Topa. No Louis Varland this year, though. He is with Toronto. And you did pick up Andrew Chafin, but losing Louis Varland is pretty significant because you're running really thin at this point in time.
Well, yeah,
So,
Varland led MLB in appearances last year, right? So I
yes,
mean, he had
yes,
some periods of ineffectiveness, but he'll take the ball every single day if you give it to him.
exactly. Again, you're not going to find a lot of pitchers that do that, especially in this season of or in this era of Major League Baseball where it's constant. Bring one guy in for an inning and then bring another guy out for another inning. Let that guy rest for 3 days. That's the other thing. So you're looking at, and again, the other thing that you have to consider with the Minnesota Twins is that they are very top heavy in terms of their prospects. Walker Jenkins, Kalen Culpepper, Eduardo Tate, Emmanuel Rodriguez, all lineup guys. None of them are pitchers. Kendrys Rojas is your next best pitcher, number 5 for your entire rotation per MLB pipeline. But you're looking at it and you're just, again, running very thin in that department. You have Dawson Hill, who, was drafted in 2024, who looked really good last year, but he's still about 2 years away. Riley Quick, 2 to 3 years away. Connor Prelip, excuse me, didn't have a good year as well, regressed significantly in terms of the whip and average department. So those are two teams that are really struggling with their depth right now. And those teams are looking into some early trouble, and they might have to go to the free agent market, pick up one guy, and then plug them into their rotation probably for the rest of the year. So those are the two teams that I'm looking at that are really in trouble. What do you think, Doug? Do you agree with me? Do you see any other teams that might be in trouble with early injury issues?
Well, losing Pablo Lopez is going to be huge for the Twins, no doubt. I think Ryan is still on the WBC roster, if I'm not mistaken, or there haven't
Yes.
been any announcements otherwise. But perhaps they'll have to consider pulling him from that because first and foremost, he's obligated to the Twins before he's obligated to the WBC.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that the Orioles, Felix Bautista, looks like he's probably out for most of the season. Now, they did sign Ryan Helsley, but the Orioles have had a lot of trouble with anyone not named Felix Bautista in that closer role. So they've brought in a lot of people, the Orioles have. I don't know if you could say they're going all in, but they're counting on these upgrades for 2026. So to have a hole at the back end of the bullpen, if Helsley isn't effective, that's going to be a major hole for them, and it's going to be hard for them to compete in the stacked AL East. There's also Tommy Edman with the Dodgers, who apparently is not going to start the season on the roster. He's going to be on the IL. So it's a good thing they signed Miguel Rojas because he's probably going to slide into the lineup for opening day, or Ha-Seong Kim will play second. But ideally, they'd want Edman in that lineup. He's kind of a catalyst. I mean, they can still perform without him, but he's a table setter in that lineup. And if one piece, starts to fall, who knows what can happen, right?
Yeah.
So those are the two teams that I kind of took note of were the Orioles and the Dodgers. Beyond that, there's small injuries here and there, but nothing too major that I picked up on.
Yeah, and the other thing that you have to look at with the Orioles is that they lost 2 of their lineup pieces, at least for the meantime. First one being Jackson Holliday, who, again, like we discussed last week, had an injury to his hamate bone, which essentially is a part of the hand or the palm that kind of helps you with the grip. And Jordan Westberg, who has an issue with his UCL and has to be cleaned up. They're hoping that they just injected him with plasma, essentially, to try to fix that and see how it goes. They're hoping he's back by May or June, depending on whether this treatment works. If not, and he has to get it repaired, he's gone for 2026. So you lose a big utility man.
It's interesting. Like 2 years ago, there was gridlock in the Orioles system. We talked about how stacked they were in AAA. And now, like, they're losing people, and you're wondering, well, who's going to play second base? Who's going to play third base? like they're starting to scramble a little bit because they traded away some of the prospects that were on the cusp of starting in MLB, and those guys aren't
Yeah.
really there anymore. I guess Kobe Mayo is going to play first,
Yes.
so that kind of leaves a hole at third. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're going to do at second
Well,
with both
well,
those guys gone.
well, per Fangraphs, they actually have Kobe Mayo listed as a third baseman, so that might be something that they are considering because he did play a little bit of third base in the Orioles system and with the Orioles when he was called up, but not a lot. He was mainly a first baseman, so we'll see what happens with that. Whether they plug him in at third for the time being, or they go to the free agency market and pick up a third baseman, whether there's any real serviceable ones available, at least for the time being.
Yeah, because
So
Alonso's going to play first. They're not going to DH them
yes.
after just signing him, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, Samuel Basallo, at least for the meantime, will likely be locked in with the designated hitter spot unless they start interchanging him with Adley Rutschman at behind the dish. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah.
Khris, did you see any teams that you're concerned about that you are worried with injuries,
Yeah,
performance, so on and so forth?
y'all stole mine. Mine was going to be the Baltimore Orioles when you didn't mention them at first. For the exact, all three of the players that the two of you just mentioned were the three that I was going to highlight. And what was always interesting with the Baltimore Orioles is, yes, they had incredible prospect depth, but I said for years, all their depth is corner infield. And really,
Mhm.
first base, because even the corner infielders that were listed as third base, like a Kobe Mayo, were not necessarily ideal third baseman. You know what I mean? And I always found that to be very concerning, is that they were stacking so many corner infielders and didn't have much depth for the middle infield. And I think we're gonna start to see that already with the two injuries they have for sure. So I don't have much to add as far outside of what you guys have already said about Baltimore, but there's certainly a team that needs to have a bit of a rebound year, and so seeing the injuries already, major injuries, and I mean, they say Westberg, being back in May or June. I mean, I hope, I certainly do not wish injuries on anybody, but that's the type of injury that lingers, and I just
Yeah.
worry even if they do force him back, he'll play, struggle a little bit, and then land back on the IL potential. I have some worries. I kind of wish they'd rip the band-aid off and make sure it's okay now and get him ready for next season, because I don't I worry that they're just prolonging the inevitable at this point, but we'll see. I mean, he could come back completely healthy, and that would be huge for them if he does. um but they're definitely a team. Minnesota is a concern injury wise, but I'm not convinced they were ever really in contention for my. I mean, it's a Central, so I guess you never know. Somebody every year pops up there that you don't necessarily expect. But I think the Tigers are pretty well established at this point. I think the Guardians are always pretty well established, and even the Royals, were showing
Yeah.
some stuff last year. So I don't know if Minnesota's injuries are necessarily critical to their long term, plans, anyways. But Atlanta is very concerning because Atlanta really
Mhm.
needed to bounce back. And I would say Lucas Giolito, who's still out there, you should watch him for Atlanta. If they are struggling to find pitching, I think he would be ideal for them to go grab, to be sort of a stabilizer in that rotation.
Yeah.
Something that they could use, for the long term. So, but those are really the three. I mean, we're gonna see injuries pop up, and teams are gonna be super careful with players, obviously, especially with the World Baseball Classic now too, which does have a tendency to bring more injuries as it is, so I think a lot of times we're going to see reports, of players, even, the Joe Ryan back stiffness, I mean, that could very well be real, but it also, not saying it's not real, but I see it as a very much an abundance of caution of like, hey, this doesn't feel, 100%, so we're not going to in any way, shape, or form stretch it as much as it's an actual like legitimate, like, oh, this guy's gonna be out for a while. So I think a lot of the injuries that pop up right now are more that outside of the obviously the Pablo Lopez one, Westbrook and things of that nature. So we'll see how it plays out, but you guys named the three that I definitely saw. So
Yeah, again, with the Orioles, and it's a shame because I honestly thought last year or 2 years ago that the Orioles would be at the top of the AL East. They still can be. They obviously are a very young team. They still have a lot of potential, a lot of promise. Unfortunately, with injuries decimating them last year and already starting off the year on a bad note with losing Holiday for at least a month and Westberg for at least a month, you're not going to start off relatively well. You're already starting off shorthanded. So that's the other thing you have to consider. And yes, you are correct. They invested so much in the corner infield and middle infield as well, and maybe a little bit of outfield. They forgot to build their pitching depth. Really, their only real pitching depth or their real pitching prospect that I can remember over the last 3 years was Grayson Rodriguez, and he's already been shipped off to the Angels for Taylor Ward, who is a decent player. He's a great outfielder, but you know it's
Danielle
unfortunate
Hall
that
was the other one that was a name for a while, and he went off to Milwaukee too. So
yes, that's the other one. And, basically those two that could have helped, transform the rotation. Now, we saw Rodriguez, but he was an injury liability, which is why they shipped him off. And the other one, same thing. They wanted to get some type of, I can't remember the exact trade, but essentially those two trades marked the fact that they are focused on infield and outfield rather than rotation. And they just mainly build their rotation through essentially trades and free agency, which is very hard to do. You have to do some home growing as well to try to build at least a suitable rotation. So we'll see what happens
when
with
it
that.
seems like you're not fully 100% sold on jumping into the free agent market too. They only seem to have, they did make obviously a big trade, and they've made some signings, obviously Pete Alonso, but again, that's offense. It seems that they're hesitant to jump full in on the pitching free agency, so you're not going to rely on pitching free agency and you're not going to rely on your minor league pitching, the only option you have is trade, and teams know that, so.
Yeah, and I'd say they're the only team in the AL East anyway that has 4 first basemen, right?
Yeah.
I still see one more trade before spring training is done. I don't see Mountcastle sticking around. Because you said Basala will probably be slotted in as DH.
Probably.
Mountcastle is still a solid bat, right? So you're either going to keep him or you're going to trade him. So, and I see them probably trading him.
I agree.
Yeah.
Decent chip for them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's unfortunate because I had high hopes for Ryan Mountcastle. Unfortunately, he did play well for the first 2 years, but his power has rapidly declined, and he is not the power hitting first baseman he once was. And with Pete Alonso, that essentially marks the end of his tenure as an Oriole, at least on a surface level, for a lack of better terms.
He could help out a lot of teams. He could help out a lot of teams. Mountcastle could.
Definitely. He could definitely, especially if he gets his power back or, a change of scenery helps him. That can help. That could absolutely be an alluring factor, and it would be a great investment for any team. Okay, so now moving on to our next segment, quickly moving through it. What and who has impressed you so far with your team in spring training this year? So yeah, it's only 3 games in to spring training, very early, but I have seen a lot of good things for the Yankees, at least for the moment, with regards to spring training. One player that I am looking at least this year, is Roderick Arias. So Roderick Arias, who I mentioned briefly earlier in the show, he is a 21-year-old prospect. They signed him about 3 to 4 years ago out of the international free agent market when he was posted. I believe he was ranked quite high in the Yankees farm system for a time. I believe he even cracked the top 100 at one point, but he has fallen off significantly, and he's fallen down that ranking quite significantly just due to poor play, not really fast development. Just really hasn't been a good last couple of years for him. He's down to number 18 in the Yankees farm system, which is not the place that you want to be. Has struggled to get over 200 and a batting average over 230. He's done it twice, did it in 2024, but he really regressed. And he lost a couple of games due to injury in 2025. Struggled to get over 200, had a 640 OPS, struck out a lot. And he is looking to try to get another shot at the for the Yankees, essentially, because he is running on borrowed time, and they might ship him off if he continues to struggle and see what they can get out of him. He has started off the spring relatively strongly. Within the first game he was in, he went 1 for 3 with a nice home run, and he had 4 RBIs. Now again, that was against a 20-3 whooping, essentially the Tigers, earlier this week on Saturday. But he does seem to kind of be a little bit more comfortable in the bat, at least a little bit more comfortable at the plate. He has been trying to draw a little bit more walks because that's what he was mainly known for: patience at the plate, drawing walks, trying to, get on base. Now, again, still very early, but I do like what I see. He's starting to lay off maybe a couple more pitches than usual. Still needs to get his strikeout rate under control, essentially, because if you want any shot in the major leagues, you got to control your strikeout rate. So we'll see what happens with him. But I like what I see so far from him. Maybe this is the year that he turns it around and comes back up in the Yankee farm system and maybe breaks the top 100 again and turns into that prospect that they signed him for a couple of years ago, hoping that they, get a great shortstop out of it or maybe a great second baseman out of it. So, Doug, any players catch your eye on your team so far this spring training?
Yeah, well, there seems to be a changing of the guard at the shortstop position with most teams in the AL East, right? I think with our three teams, it's safe to say that there is, right?
Yes.
Maybe we'll see. But I know with the Jays, Andres Jimenez is slotted in at shortstop to start the season. That's great. He played fantastically well. But his natural position is second base. That's where he was a Platinum Glove winner with the Guardians before coming over to Toronto. And that's where he played before Bichette was injured last year. But he's going to start the season at shortstop. However, Arjun Namala has come into camp, similar to what you were saying, Khris, with the prospect that you spoke of. Much heavier, probably about 20, 25 pounds heavier than he was last season. Now, over the course of 2 seasons, he was a first-round pick in 2023. He's hit 30 home runs, just over 100 RBIs in around 200 minor league games. But he's coming into camp really pounding the ball in BP. And I watched the game today against the Red Sox, and I saw him field a slow roller off Sedan Rafaela, and he charged through the ball, threw a dart to first base, and beat Rafaela by about 3 steps.
Yeah.
So super smooth at short. He kind of reminds me of Carlos Correa when he came up, just a natural shortstop build and natural shortstop instincts. So that's really exciting for the Jays. Now, he's only 20, so it's highly unlikely that he's going to crack the roster to begin the season. But I do think he's in the plans for 2026. And if the Jays could have their plans work out perfectly, it would be for Jimenez to move back over to second and for Namala to come in and play at short. But like I said, it's probably not going to happen on opening day. Mm-hmm. But if he continues to tear it up this spring, you never know. Anything could happen. And that'd be really exciting for the city of Toronto if he's the first he will be the first Major League Baseball player of East Indian descent, right? His family's from India. And I know in Toronto we have a large East Indian community. So that would be really exciting for the city if Namala at the age of 20 could, crack the lineup, crack the roster and make the team. So we'll see what happens there.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And, again, Namala breaking camp does seem a little unlikely. His highest level of play is high A, so they might try to keep him at high A or double A to start the season, get a little bit more experience because he does need a little bit more playing time at higher levels. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't think he's going to break camp, but if he does put on a nice spring, there's reason for a promotion to double A at the very least.
I know that first round picks, like it's not extremely it's not totally out of the question that a first round pick, even if they've only had A-ball experience, if they have a good spring, for them to make the jump to the team, right? It could happen. Yep. It's not totally out of the question.
It could happen. It definitely could happen. There's been surprises in spring training all the last couple of years. Who knows? Maybe we get one more. Khris, what about your team? See anything you like? What do you think about your team? You're comfortable?
Yeah, so it seems like, at least short term, we've mostly figured out what the plan is with the lineup. The one question mark still being what we're doing exactly with the outfield versus, DH and who's going to be landing themselves on the bench as a result. But it seems like with the trade of for Caleb Durbin. He's probably going to play second base.
Yep.
Mayer seemed pretty locked into third base at this point with Story. So there's not much in the actual lineup. And then pitching, I've talked about in the past. I mean, that's certainly up for grabs. And the Red Sox have pretty much admitted that the number 5 spot in that rotation is entirely up for grabs between 4 different guys, and it just,
Yeah.
they want to see what they got there. But because I've already talked about that, I won't necessarily highlight that. There are 2 guys that I'm intrigued to see. They're not necessarily prospects, but have made some interesting noise already in Red Sox camp. The first one being Brayan Bello, who pitched today. He didn't look great. However, he has had a lot of talk with his changeup, and specifically working on it in the offseason. And he's brought the velocity down about 4 miles per hour from where it was last year. And last year was his best season, but it was his worst for his changeup. And so if he could add back that changeup, that could be that one final missing piece. If he could keep up with everything else he was already doing last year and add that changeup back in, which for his entire career was his most devastating pitch, that would be a huge and very intriguing addition there. And then the other one, go ahead.
No, I heard Suarez has been a big influence on him so far.
He did. Suarez he taught him the changeup, and actually he has a second pitch now too that he taught Bayo as well. So we'll see how that goes. So I think they were working on some of that today. That's why the results weren't necessarily there numbers wise, but it seemed like people were pretty happy with what they saw out of him. So that's going to be something to watch. And then the other name, who was sort of a forgotten name in that Caleb Durbin trade, was Andrew Monasterio, who's sort of a utility guy. And we were talking about injuries. Rami Gonzalez, we're not sure if he's going to be ready to start the season. And it's looking more and more likely like Monasterio is probably going to get that spot if Rami Gonzalez isn't ready. And I think I really like that. Not only did he already hit a home run in Grapefruit League, which, whatever, it's Grapefruit League, take numbers with a grain of salt, but Cora has already come out and said, listen, this kid shocked me with his balance of speed and his power that he has that people don't expect to have there. He's really been standing out to me at camp, and that would be a big, interesting little addition there if we could get another solid right-handed bat on that bench, that could fill in a few different positions where we're still a little iffy in that infield. If we could add him with speed and some power, to be sort of a utility guy for us, I think that would be a big boon to that bench. So he's the other guy I'm watching. So.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of guys that it's still very early in camp. Guys could absolutely appear out of nowhere and just completely change the entire storyline of any team. So a lot of baseball still needs to be played. All right, just going really quickly to our last subject, just because we are running out of time. Biggest threat to your team going into spring training. Essentially, it's just really what we are worried about with regards to our team. I'm going to start with the Yankees. Injuries, obviously, are always the large question with regards to that, especially with Rodon and Cole still recovering from injury, from surgeries. Again, Cole with Tommy John, Rodon with his shoulder. And what about Aaron Judge? Because he is going to be 34 this year. He has had some injuries in the past that have derailed the seasons. He's gotten lucky these last 2 years, avoiding major injury, and has played at a very high level. But what happens if he goes down, and then you have to replace him with whether it be Jason Dominguez or even Spencer Jones if he performs at a very high level, or if he performs at a good level enough to make the team, or if he gets called up to replace Aaron Judge in that lineup because of the injury and the free extra space, essentially. That's the other thing you have to consider. So that's my biggest concern. All right, Doug, really quickly, what's the biggest concern with your team you have?
Well, I'm not sure that the rotation is as deep as everybody thinks it is with the Jays. Bassett really sort of tied that rotation together, especially that was proven in the playoffs. He kind of fluctuated from the bullpen back to the starting rotation, but they needed him in that rotation, and they didn't make any effort really to sign him. I think that they're one injury away from a troubling situation with that starting rotation. We're taking for granted that Trey Savage is going to be phenomenal this year, but That's a lot of pressure on a
Yeah.
22-year-old pitcher. I'm
Yeah.
hoping it plays out, but it's really not guaranteed. The Toronto Blue Jays have a lot of depth. I wouldn't say that extends completely to their starting rotation, though.
Mhm.
So I'm a little bit worried about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the other thing. There's Trey Savage, because don't forget, Trey Savage is going into his first full season as an MLB pitcher. So what happens when you get to June and July and August, the dog days of the season? What happens? Does he perform at a high level? Does he fade off a little bit? Does he step back? That's the other question you have to consider. Chris, really quickly, what's the concern you have with your team?
Yeah, it's all on the offense, specifically youth and power. We're relying on a very young core, a very electric core, but still a pretty young core on offense, and one that outside of Roman Anthony really isn't known for its power. That was a question coming into the offseason. It was a question pretty much every Red Sox fan said, how are we going to solve this issue? And we didn't. I mean, we went a little bit backwards if you look at going from Bregman to Caleb Durbin, at least in terms of power, maybe not overall talent, or whatever else Durbin may be able to bring to the table. Certainly
Yeah,
not the leadership Bregman did, but certainly in terms of power, we arguably went backwards. So it'll be very interesting to see how they handle
yeah,
that and whether that ultimately is their downfall or whether they can make it work without a true power bat.
If Anthony
definitely.
hits 45 home runs, I think everyone will sort of
Yeah,
forget about that, right?
for
Yeah.
sure.
If Roman Anthony performs at that level, he might be that. I think people will forget about Alex Bregman at
I
that
certainly
point.
wouldn't
But
complain.
absolutely, I don't think anybody in Boston would complain with those numbers at all. All right, so that is going to do it for us on this Sunday evening of Dirty Leather. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. Uh, Again, spring training is finally kicking into full gear. Another week of baseball coming up, and we hope to watch it with you guys. So for me, Doug, and Chris, and this is Jesse signing off, and we will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Take care, y'all.
Yes.